Hello. Hi. Let's move on to our next thing. So 2 weeks ago, we had presented with the aid of Anna from Convergence, the results of the survey and the work that we had done to take a picture of ourselves, to see what we looked like in the mirror, albeit darkly now. And what we're going to do today is we're going to do part 2 of this 3-part educational process. So the second part today is a webinar that is being presented by Cameron Trimble. Cameron Trimble is our representative and our leader from Convergence. And so having taken our own survey and taken our own picture, the next step is to see and think about the trends in mainline churches around the country, to know that we're not alone, and to give us a better understanding of where we are in terms of what we're dealing with. Next week, we'll finish this community education piece and we'll do a webinar on what some creative churches have done besides Hennepin in stepping forward into these changes and these trends. And when we're done with those 3 things, then we'll be in a position to start saying, okay, what are we going to look like? So this is all part of the process. It's been a fantastic effort so far. And so I want to thank you all for taking the time and the interest in doing this. I do want to tell you, I was semi-inspired by Elizabeth's story about David today. And I want you to take some courage in this because there is some fear around this. I've heard it. I played rugby at the College of Carleton, which, as you know, is known for its athletic prowess. And on occasion, we would face University of Minnesota, or we would face University of Iowa. We faced Iowa State. We faced University of Wisconsin, and we were a school of 1,600, half of them intrepid boys. And we would stand there at the field and look at some of these guys, and some of them resembled Samson. Some of them resembled the big Philistine. And what we would do is when the ball was kicked and it would fall into our hands, we would grab that ball, and around us would be our teammates, and they always said, with you. We never stopped saying, with you. And sometimes we'd win. A lot of times we'd lose. God was not in favor of the Carleton rugby team. I think he devoted his attention to St. Olaf. But we always had each other. We have each other here. Thank you for coming here. And hopefully we've got Cameron and we can get her on. But in the meantime, I would just want to say, with you.
Okay, thank you, Bill. That was a great story. And Elizabeth and all of you, I just need to verify, and I'm afraid somebody's gonna either have to unmute or give me a thumbs up on the camera that you can both hear me and see the screen, just to make sure that the tech is working. Great. All right. Look at that. Elizabeth is on it, as always. Well, it's a joy to be with you all. I know this has been a long day for you, but I hope that the next many minutes that we spend together is engaging and provocative in a way of helping us all kind of think together so that we'll learn together. As Bill outlined, today what I'm hoping to do with you all is think together about the big shifts and trends that are impacting institutional religion right now, but that experience impacted by a larger scene even of what's happening across institutions right now, kind of at a global scale. And this is significant because we're probably living at at maybe what might be the most interesting time in human history. I mean, every generation thinks that they're living at the most interesting time, but I would make the argument, given the kind of the level of polycrises we're facing right now and the challenges before us, and the way we're kind of remaking culture, that this is actually it. This is probably the most interesting time of human history. And we are stewards of these institutions that have been gifted to us by previous generations. And we're now facing questions and opportunities that our ancestors never dreamed would be upon us at this point. And so there's an instinct that is invited in this moment, again, in human evolution, that requires a certain ability to be playful about the questions, in a sense, to wonder about the theological story that we're telling, and to build a certain instinct about understanding the dynamics and shifts that we are, in fact, living through. So I want to play in that space with you this morning. So we'll be flying kind of at 30,000 feet, if you will, and as an aviator, that I like to use those metaphors. So we'll be far above the terrain. And as Bill said, in our next time together, we will come closer in and look at very particular congregations who are doing things that we don't want to necessarily copy per se, but are aspirational and inspirational. And again, it can help us think as we're discerning what it is that we are called to be now in this present moment, but also into the future. So as I have signaled, I think that this moment is inviting a particular way of seeing the world right now, a certain kind of lens through which we can begin to discern kind of futuring into at least the immediate future, if not further than that. And I began to think of this moment as kind of what I call the great unveiling. And isn't in the sense, this moment is not necessarily a moment of tremendous transformation. I'm not sure we're there quite yet. But what it has done through these last many years that we've lived through of pretty significant disruption is unveiled to us, made clear to us, made more obvious to us shifts and changes that we were already experiencing, that were already true, but we now see them with a clarity that had not been available to us before. So in a sense, there's a new way of seeing, and there are new dynamics at play. Now, one of the ways that I have developed this skill in myself was actually gifted to me by my flight instructor. So I've been a pilot for a long, long time, and I have had the privilege of working with I've worked with a gazillion flight instructors, but one flight instructor in particular who has kind of worked with me throughout my whole aviation career. When you go to flight school, what you think that they're going to do is sit you in a chair and give you loads of books, and there'll be a big whiteboard, and you just spend most of your time in ground school. What he did, alternatively, was he put me in an airplane, and we took off. And I mean, I knew nothing about what I was doing. So I tried multiple times to kill us both, but gratefully did not succeed. But then when we got back to do ground school, he started to show me pieces of art. It was a strange experience, but I'll show you now what I recognize as his brilliance. And so he started to show me pieces of art, asking me what I was seeing, like what did I see when I looked at these? Because he understood that in flying, the single most dangerous thing that happens to flights consistently is that the pilot misses important cues or fails to see significant shifts in instrumentation or in the terrain. And so they don't have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, in a sense. And so there's a certain skill set that's required in basic safe flight that he wanted to instill in me as a muscle. And the same I would argue about leadership today, that there's a certain instinct, a certain way of seeing the shifts and the changes and the changes of air temperature and turbulence and terrain changes that lead to effective leadership and effective vision in this age, and lead to oppressive and life-taking and suppressive leadership that we certainly want to avoid. So I want to show you a series of images, and let's just play together. Let's see what you see. So the first image I'm going to show you is one that was taken during World War II. It was taken by a soldier who was embedded also as a photographer. And it's a grainy. It's kind of hard to make out, but I'm going to show you the image, and then if you want to, those of you online, you can put in the chat what you think you're looking at here. If you want to put it, if you can say it in the room, if somebody can just popcorn out, what do you think you're seeing? Let's just take a minute and be playful here. But not all at once. It's annoying when we do it all at once. A glacier. Person. Good. Thank you, Laura. Any others? Any other guesses? All right. Well, I'll trust that you've got your own theories here. Reporting out may be a challenge. So I'm going to now show you the image actually in sort of starker relief. And let's see if this is what you saw. Some people see it right away and some people don't. So it's actually a picture of a cow in a field. A lot of people, when they look at this, they might see like roads and housing blocks here, as Laura said, maybe a glacier. Because I started talking about this image in reference to aviation, a lot of people think this is an aerial shot, which is interesting because I intentionally lead you to believe that might be what it is, right? So it's a distracting technique that I was using there, hopefully that had some impact. So it's a matter of perspective, of orientation, of proximity to what we're looking at that helps us to clarify our seeing. Here's another piece of art I really love. It's by an artist by a woman named Kumi Yamashito. And she's a Japanese artist, though she is now shows her art primarily in the United States. When you look at this piece, it's extraordinary to me. I would ask you, like, what do you think it's made of? Like, what do you think these little white dots are? Because at this perspective, we can't see, can we? We can just see this full image, this, really pretty portrait of this person. But when you zoom in, you begin to see some of the contours. So 30,000 feet, we can't see. We see the full picture, but we can't see actually what the picture's made of. But at, let's say 12,000 feet here, we can see, or maybe 5, let's go closer. We can actually see that this picture is made up of brads, of actual brads that she's nailed into a piece of plywood. And these brads are connected by black yarn, a single string of black yarn that she's woven together. And then if I take you into, 2,000 feet here, you can actually begin to see some of those details, right? So our proximity to the kind of change that we're trying to intuit, the kind of shifts that we're seeing right now, gives us different access and different ways of knowing, which again is another essential leadership skill here. So if I showed you this picture, we would never have understood the intricacies, the real beauty of what she's created, the kind of the intensity with which she had to engage in creating this piece of art. But then if I show you at the different levels, you begin to understand the complexity, the interconnection, the interdependence of what is going on right here. So it's a different way of seeing in the world. Just one final example here I want to show you. This was an experiment that was done in 2010 that shows, well, actually, I'll stop there. So here's what I want you to do. We're going to watch this together, and I'd like you to count the number of times the ball is passed between the people in the white t-shirts. So the ball can be bounced and passed, and that counts as one, right? So sometimes they just like shoot it to each other, and sometimes they bounce it. Both of those count as one. So just count how many times you see this ball getting passed between the people in the white t-shirts. All right. So I'm curious, did anybody get a count in the main room? I don't know if there's a microphone that we can use, or if it's just too hard. Anybody online? Yeah, Laura counted 10. Good. Um, um, did you all see the gorilla? Did you all see the big hairy gorilla that walked right through the middle of it? So yeah, nope, right. So let's watch it one more time. So this cracks me up. The first time I saw this video, I did not see this ginormous gorilla that walked right across my screen in the middle of this exchange here. And I didn't, because I was told to watch the people in the white shirts. And so my eyes tuned out anything that was in the black. So there's a sort of a self-imposed blindness that I put on myself here. But let's watch it one more time and see. And here comes this giant gorilla that just walks right through the middle and then walks right off as if it's no big thing. So for those of you who saw it, bravo to you. You were tuned in at a level that many of us are not. Those of you who missed it, don't feel badly. That ball was passed 16 times. If you came up with that number, congratulations. But isn't it interesting the way that we can see and not see certain things that are absolutely present in our reality, but that we tune out, or we don't tune into, as just a practice of being human in this world. I point this out simply because we're living in such an interesting time of deep transition and shifting. And our capacity to tune into some of these transitions and the dynamics that we're engaging right now are particularly important for us to understand and appropriately diagnose the opportunities and the challenges that are facing us right now, particularly as congregations needing to reimagine how they can be in this world, and what is their essential work to be done. So what is being revealed at this moment? If you think about all that we've lived through and just these, let's just take the last, I don't know, 10 to 15 years of our collective shared experience together. One way of thinking about it that helps me in my memory is, if you think about, we've lived through together a financial meltdown, climate breakdown, COVID lockdown, racial throwdown, Christian nationalism letdown. And now we're seeing technology showdowns where we have alternative facts and different platforms, because they're corporately owned, provide different levels of propaganda or algorithm complexities that are unique now to the human experience. It's a really challenging time to have gone through all of this disorientation, these ways in which our institutions are being fundamentally unmade and remade. So when we're working with congregations today, or when I'm talking to pastors, most of them are, a little frazzled, a little frayed around the edges. And I loved this image of, when someone asks you how you've been holding up, we're all walking around saying we're fine, but in truth, actually, we're wildly disoriented. We're trying to figure out how to make sense of this world, which seems day by day to make less and less sense. When you talk to cultural trauma specialists, they point out that for a human to be in a posture of integration and of resilience, that there's a certain balance that exists between their physical, psychological, spiritual, social, and financial well-being. And financial, what I mean is your sense of safety, your sense of that the 5 needs in the hierarchy are being addressed and met. And what's happening at this point at global scale for a huge number of millions and millions of people, is that we're actually experiencing a fracturing of our internal integration, of our sense of resilience and of agency in our culture. And what that creates, the trauma specialists teach us, is it creates a break in our ability to respond, our response ability. And because we begin to have that break internally, what we see then are the byproducts that look like an epidemic of loneliness, which our Surgeon General is now telling us about, and we're seeing in our at grand scale in our ministries and our congregations. It creates increases in addiction and in mental health issues. It creates inabilities for people to connect in meaningful and real ways with their colleagues, with their families, with their kids. So we're seeing a break in people's ability to respond in healthy ways with regulated nervous systems, that we're experiencing change at such a rapid rate. In fact, philosopher Jean Houston often points out that you and I are living 10 times the number of life experiences that our ancestors lived just 2 or 3 generations ago. The rate at which our lives are moving is unprecedented in human history. And we're not built to function with the kind of stress and strain that many of us are having to deal with on a daily basis. And when you scale that up, then what we're seeing here shouldn't surprise us. That what we're seeing is in these breakdowns of these institutions which have formed human culture up to this point, are unable at this point to address the polycrises that we're facing of climate change, of political disruption, of the threat of nuclear proliferation, of all of these huge scaled of the ending of capitalism, et cetera. These huge scale challenges that we're facing now as a culture. We are living in this weird space of not being able to adequately and in a scaled way respond to solve these problems. And institutional religion is one more symptom of this very larger collective challenge that we're facing. And fundamentally, it is that we've reached the end of a certain kind of story we were telling ourselves about the human experience, a story in Western culture that was one of independent ruggedness, maybe best illustrated by oh shoot, what is the TV show with the cowboys? It's leaving me. If somebody can remember it, it's got Kevin Costner in it, if that helps. Those kinds of stories of the Yellowstone. Thank you, Laura. Thank God for Laura for so many reasons. And so, there's this story we've been telling ourselves as a culture that is breaking down. And the church is complicated in this. And I watched Jim Wallace, his talk with you all, and I thought Jim did a very good job of helping to unpack how the theology and the story that we're telling ourselves now is inadequate for creating a more just and generous culture, a more just and generous world for us to move forward. And that the church, as it's currently formed, is the direct result of that old story. Mainline Christianity in the United States is the inheritor of a story that's steeped in assumptions and values that are impossible to carry forward with the level of diversity that we now have in this world that has been true all along, but we have never needed to engage it at the level that we do today. So here's one way of thinking about what's going on here. In meaningful ways, we're actually experiencing the collapse or disruption or radical reimagining in 4 key areas. At the archetypal level, the basic at the mythological level, the stories that we tell ourselves about our culture are fraying. They have served us well to get us to this point, but the rugged individualism, the American superiority, or elitism, the story of machismo, of dominance has taken us as far as it can go. We're seeing, of course, a rise of nativism, of a counterculture of if we could just go back to the good old days, and the good old days when that story still worked for us. And so we've got a whole political party right now in our country, but also in many, many countries, who are offering this nostalgic story of if we could just get back to when all of this worked. But fundamentally, the story is broken, and it will not carry us forward to a sustainable world, which also speaks to that the theological questions are different today than they have been at any point in human history. I love the partnership that you all are engaged with Garrett, and the study that you all are doing with these, academics and theologians who are helping us to reintegrate or to better integrate a more holistic theological framework for understanding how we might move forward together. Now, the archetypal story, the theological story we're telling, is super important because it's the foundation upon which our values, ethics, and beliefs are based. It's the foundation upon which our culture and systems, our economic, politic, and religious systems are based. And it's also the framework through which each of us individually creates our own psychology, our own understanding of the meaning of our lives, and what we want to dedicate our energy to and invest our goodwill and our love towards, right? So everything about the systems that we as human beings create is predicated on a kind of theology that is more agile, more flexible, more open, more integrated with the natural world than it has needed to be up until this point. So there's a real call to theological practitioners, a real call to congregations right now as wisdom bearers in this culture, where when our stories, our theological stories need to be rewritten, need to be reimagined, need to be looked at through different kinds of lenses, at different altitudes, different perspectives. This is the critical work to which congregations are called at this moment. There may very well be nothing more important, because here's where we're moving to and from. So we're moving from stories that have been based in hierarchy. Its current expression and its longest lasting expression has been one of toxic masculinity and violence. So we're the inheritors of a worldview that says, I need to be better than you. I'm going to compete with you. I'm threatened by you. I want to dominate you, right? And so we've set up systems of and highlighted stories of hierarchy. So think Iron Man, for example, or Thor, or Superman is another great. All of these Marvel and DC superhero stories have levels of that kind of storyline in them. Even though I watch them and enjoy them just as much as anyone, I recognize that the values that they hold are not the values that can shape us going forward. Now, because we've adopted this hierarchical stance, this storyline, white supremacy becomes a very natural byproduct of that. In fact, you can't really maintain hierarchy if you don't have one body or one group of people who are better than another. And in our case, it's just easy to designate based on skin color because it's not a thing one can easily hide. So we chose white supremacy as our expression of dominance here to shape then the values, ethics, and beliefs, our isms in our culture. And then we naturally created an economic system based on competition, where the person with the most toys wins, the person with the most wealth holds the most power, is highest on the hierarchy, right? And so we create this system that is dependent on endless growth and inequality and limited access. And then what that then creates is a sense, the minute we're born into the world, of you need to fight to survive. There's a us versus them, in either or kind of competitive mindset that we train our young ones up in very early. Now, this may be a little too rose-colored glasses, but I think and I hope that this is where at least a significant percentage of us are trying to move ourselves to, both individually and collectively. And I need to say, when you study revivals, awakenings, and reforms, the times in human history where real change has happened in a large scale and has stuck, it's not a guarantee that we move from this one side to this other space. The nativists could very well win out, which is why this particular moment is of real serious consequence. Our leadership is needed more now than before. But what I hope we're seeing is that there's an emerging stories of our interdependence, interdependence not only with each other, as a collective global body, not just as Americans, not just as Israelis or Palestinians or Russians or Canadians, but as humans, as earthlings in a sense. And I think one of the signs that we're seeing, or one of the helps that we're being gifted, is these beautiful images coming back from the James Webb Telescope that's helping us realize what a vast, incredible series of universes that we live in. This cosmos is so huge that it gives us the chance for a new kind of identity as earthlings, something that holds us together. Interdependence, not just with each other, but with nature, with this beautiful blue planet upon which we live, but also this wider sense of relationship now to these other universes, these other cosmoses that exist, that we can now see, at least. And if everything belongs, if there's a sense of interconnection and interdependence, then everyone belongs, that there's a respect for the plurality, the diversity that has, again, existed all along in human history. But because of our isolation, we've never needed to engage each other. But now through technology and the way we travel at this point, we're encountering each other's differences at a scale we haven't seen. And if we do this well, this incredible transitional moment through which human beings are currently moving, we will invest into and opt for an eco-civilization, one that is sustainable and that holds itself in sacred balance, where we are a partner with this planet and not its oppressor. And if that happens, then what that grants, what that gives space for, is at the individual level that we will have created reward systems that honor a contemplative posture. Not to say that we're all going to go join monasteries, though honestly, you could sign me up for that now and I'd be thrilled. But contemplative in the sense that we are rewarded in our culture for asking wise questions, asking the deeper questions of a more holistic and integrated life, that we're asking, and we're rewarding people for becoming wiser, not wealthier. And in that sense, then we create a space where we recapture our elders and eldering as an art form. And we create a system or a society that rewards our wisdom bearers, which is sorely, in my opinion, lacking at the moment. But we're kind of at this pivot point, and this graph might be a bit overwhelming, but I show it simply to say we're at this interesting moment where all of these huge challenges and shifts are happening across every sector of human culture. Right? So institutional religion, while it's going through tremendous changes, is just one among many of the gazillion of changes that humans are going through at this particular moment. Ours is a unique role to play because we do have that sensibility of wisdom, of the spiritual intuition, of the mystic's call, if you will. But at the rate at which AI, for example, is coming into our world, the rate at which global economic systems are developing, the rate at which our political systems are shifting, it's a really interesting time to be human, and a lot is at stake in it. Margaret Wheatley is an extraordinary teacher, philosopher, consultant. She's written a number of books, but this is one I recommend to you if you like to be as geeky as I am. And she was early in the emergence movement in the business world, so you may have run into some of her work there. But she says in this book, who do we choose to be? Because she says we're at this pivot point in human history. We have a choice of who we wish to be going forward. She says it needs to be clearly stated at the outset, we can no longer solve the problems of this time at large scale levels: poverty, economics, climate change, violence, dehumanization. Even though the solutions have been available for a long time, they require conditions to implement them that are not available: political courage, collaboration across national boundaries, compassion that supersedes self-interest and greed. So what she says then is that at this point, given again, the term now being used, the polycrises that we're facing as a globe, it's tempting to just say, well, these are so big and I can't do anything. But what she encourages us to do, and many others now are joining their voices, is to actually recognize that the single most subversive thing we might do is to create what she calls circles of sanity, or we might call them hubs of hope, in every local community where people can come together to practice the values that we just talked about, that we want to see embodied in the world. And if I could imagine an incredible calling for congregations at this point in human history, it would be to serve as those circles of sanity, as those places where you can go there being assured that by being as a part of this community, you will become more loving, you will become a more kind person, you will understand compassion at a deeper level, you will have support and friendship, that it will be a place where the values that we wish to embody that are not necessarily being embodied at the higher scales can be embodied at the local scale and can be sources of resilience for each of us individually. So in that way, it kind of ups the ante, if you will, for congregations not only to remain healthy and vital in whatever ways that they can be, that doesn't necessarily have to be numeric, but that we actually get ambitious about what we're up to, that we realize that actually what we're doing is reweaving the relational fabric of our community, which is being torn apart by all these extraordinary forces, most of which are beyond anybody's individual control, where families are struggling to stay together, where individuals are struggling with mental health challenges at unprecedented scale, where companies are fracturing or are stealing people's souls, where all of this dehumanization is happening, that our congregations can be a firewall, an antidote to reweaving that relational fabric that keeps us human and whole. I've been the pastor of 4 different congregations, and now I do this work. I've been doing this work for 25 years and worked with hundreds of congregations. And a lot of the time they would say, you know, what is our mission statement? And I really still to this day, I can't think of a better mission statement for any congregation or in every congregation than Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of us but to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with God? I mean, that's what we do. We seem to enjoy doing that through holding a lot of meetings and forming a lot of committees and, you know, doing a lot of things that make us feel very busy. But at the end of the day, all we need to do is to do work in the service of justice, to love one another with deep kindness, and to walk humbly with God. However that gets expressed, that is a circle of sanity at this moment that is more important now, again, than I think ever before. When we study congregations as trends, as traditions, I should say, we recognize that in the United States, in particular, that they've come out in 3 kind of distinct expressions. So there's some congregational tribes that fall more in the apocryphal or the prophetic tradition. So we might think of Pentecostals, for example, kind of fall into that space. Some of our African American traditions and now Latino traditions kind of fall into that apocryphal prophetic space. And then we might think of in the personal spiritual development space, that's really where our evangelical brothers and sisters kind of grabbed the leadership space of that. So when you go into some of these big box evangelical churches, their primary focus is how is your relationship with Jesus? And if I'm being snarky, you know, a lot of the music is the Jesus is my boyfriend kind of music. But it's about your personal piety. How is your soul with God? And are you saved? And you know, how is your spirit? And then the rest of us kind of fall into this activism and social spiritual development space, where particularly around the 1960s, we in mainline Christianity began to really develop capacities and skills and sensitivities in justice work, in moving into how to actually embody the values of our faith in creating change in culture. One could make an argument that our three expressions held in that very general, oversimplified way of seeing this has actually is at this moment needing to be reintegrated. That a healthy congregation at this point can take the gifts of each of these three circles and integrate them in ways that help people heal internally, act externally, and help to heal this planet that we're harming so much through our work. So wouldn't it be interesting that where most of the stories that we're told right now are about division, there's actually an opportunity to learn from the gifts of each of these tribes and to integrate the best of what we each have to offer each other into some kind of new spiritual expression that holds a balance in all three of these circles. One of the reasons that we might point to some of the decline of mainline Christianity is that we've become social service institutions, or another phrase I hear a lot is we're country clubs, in a sense, that there's very little spiritual depth to what we're up to. And as Elizabeth said, as we were getting started today, how important it is, in fact, that we reclaim the depth of the spiritual maturity that is needed in this particular age. And to through that wisdom work, reclaim some of that prophetic and apocryphal wisdom of leadership that we can offer into the world, to provide a pathway forward, to tell a new story, if you will, about what humanity is about. Now, gratefully, there are a lot of people already doing this work, a lot of voices that we can learn from and lean on, and study what they're up to, and listen to their podcasts and be inspired by the lens through which they're seeing this world. But we also have to acknowledge that there is no Superman coming to save us. There is no one individual that's going to solve these challenges. There is no one savior for us out of the complexity of this world that we're creating. That there's actually the need for all of us to take our own responsibility, our own agency for our own development, our own wisdom deepening, our own meditative practices, our own learning, our own sense of curiosity about this world, so that we offer it not as followers of some grand guru, but as peer contributors in an age that requires vast amounts of personal discernment and collective discernment, as we're trying to reimagine and reinvent a world that is more sustainable, more just and generous for all of us. I love this quote by Karl Rahner. He's a Catholic priest who said, "The Christian of the future will be a mystic, or he, she, they will not exist at all." That there's a compelling invitation right now, and we saw this in the rise of COVID, or during COVID, that there's a rise in the interest of reclaiming the mystics, the teaching of mystics, by which I mean simply people who studied the tradition, respect the tradition, but discerned a way of having direct encounters with the sacred, encounters that were so significant that they fundamentally shifted or changed who that person was. Mystics are ones who seek out God kind of brazenly, boldly, as a way of tapping into their own sense of wisdom that's available to all of us, should we take on that path. That's the kind of path I think that mainline Christianity is being invited on, kind of a reclaiming of our internal sense of spiritual growth and internal sense of spiritual development as the source code, as the animator for our social activism, rather than our activism being fueled by more of a shallow expression of spiritual depth within us. That actually there's deep, deep spiritual work that can be done at this moment. Now that's a lot. I've geeked out with you. I thank you for that, because I love to geek out about this. But I want to actually say, so what? So how how are our ministries changing like right now, and what should we pay attention to? I wanted to show you the kind of the bad news first, and then we'll start to talk about the good news. In a study that was recently released, recently as in actually probably now 2 years ago, if I think about that, there was a study, it was the longest study of congregational growth that was ever conducted by Faith Communities Today and the Hartford Seminary research team. And they discovered that from the year 2020, I'm sorry, from the year 2000 to the year 2020, we have seen an extraordinarily fast decline in congregational participation. So in this graph on the left, what we see is that actually the number of congregations that we would consider to be small, that is congregations with 90 members or less, has grown significantly. And that the average participation, which is what we see on the right, has actually dropped from 137 as an average participant number in congregations in the United States to 65. I mean, that is a shocking decline. And what that will ultimately mean is that, and this was all, mind you, before the pandemic, right? So the pandemic has accelerated these numbers in some significant ways. So we are now seeing a plateau, and even in some congregations, such as yours, we're seeing some new energy and new engagement. But what this means is that we're about to see an absolute tidal wave of church closures that are going to happen across the country. And again, your congregation is in an interesting pivot point, because your congregation is what we'd call a mid-sized church, despite your glorious building, and it's so beautiful. I love getting to see that. You're actually you're not large enough that you've got think large evangelical big box churches, right? You don't have tons and tons of human energy operating in your space. You do have financial stability, which is more than most congregations have, and that's a wonderful gift that you've got. And you do have a building that is in great shape on the whole for a lot of congregations. Your giving, though, is of course experiencing some plateau and or decline, and that's probably only going to continue. That if you track with most other mainline congregations, that's just a factor. And so what we're going to see then is possibly and let me be careful in how I say this. I don't want it to be diagnostic for you, but if we used a congregation like yours as a case study, what we could predict is that a congregation like yours, if it continues on its current trajectory without doing some very cool thinking that I think you all are capable of, we'll see a decline in human energy, an aging congregation, and smaller shrinking congregation. You'll see a decline in giving. But you might actually be able to kind of stay put for longer than most because of endowments and other funds that you've got available to yourselves. So you're in this kind of interesting moment where you get to be very creative with how you are in the world and what you want to do. Now, smaller congregations are likely to actually do okay because they've already right-sized their staff. They have very low overhead, and many of them have already paid for their buildings generations ago. So those are most of our rural congregations that are quite small, but they're stalwarts, and then the larger congregations, kind of big box congregations, will see some shrinking of that. But 90% of all US churchgoers go to those churches. Now that's alarming in a lot of ways, but what that means then is that they're the front doors, if you will, into our congregations. So we should give thanks for these larger congregations because they're the ones you're most likely to go to if you have no church experience. And then when people are there and they become dissatisfied with the theology or the experience or whatever it is, they end up coming to our mainline congregations. So it's a good feeding system. So again, let me just hasten to the close here. What are some of the contours that we can already see that matter? Worship services are no longer the main front door. They are one among many. So most people are not waking up and saying, gosh, I wish I could just go sit in a pew on a Sunday and listen to music and have a lecture about God. I know you all do because you're there. But a lot of people are no longer doing that. So we have now a multitude of front doors that include small groups, that includes justice actions, that include study groups, etc. And those front doors should count just as much or be just as legitimate as our worship services on Sunday. An interesting new research has come out about who's attending online church, and what we have found statistically is that actually virtual worship for the most part is engaged primarily by people who are already religiously engaged. It's not really reaching new younger generations, and in fact it's the opposite. It's actually the vast majority of people who attend services online have attended that congregation in person at some point. So it's more of a convenience. It's an add-on feature. And it's also, oh, it says screws older. It should say skews, sorry, older. But it has made all of these services available to people with disabilities in a way that had not been previously offered. So there's real benefit to it, but it's benefit to an audience that had already likely been engaged. Daily engagement Sunday worship is the best way to measure vitality and growth. As I mentioned before, church closures will accelerate, and this will radically reshape our denominations, which you all know better than most right now. And we should have a whole conversation about the opportunities that come with that. Our funding and staffing models will need to be reimagined because for most congregations, they're unsustainable. We will have multiple affiliation and niche associations. That is to say, when I was the pastor of a congregation in Atlanta, I had members who would attend our worship service, but then at 11, but then at 8:30, they sang in the Episcopal Church's choir because they liked their music program better. And then they had friends who were part of the Lutheran church that was just a few blocks away, and they did a 6-week book study that they were really interested in. And so more and more of us are picking and choosing based on our interests and friendships that we're making. We're not loyal to just one congregation per se. Climate change will be the issue for our children and grandchildren's generation. So we should pay attention to that and center that in what we're engaged in these days. The progressive movement will invest in practices, liturgies, and theologies that will reconnect us to nature. And I could have taken out that word progressive if you don't want to hold that for yourself. But I will say any viable faith tradition in the future will focus on practices that strengthen that relationship and reconnect us to the natural world. And then we're seeing a rise in spiritual leaders who work outside of traditional congregational settings, which is to say, in a sense, theologians have been let out of the building. And so a lot of theological work is now being done in corporate settings and in non-traditional spaces that I think holds great hope. So I'll close with this. This is a piece of art by the same Japanese artist that I showed you early on. This one is made by actually removing the dark threads in the tapestry that she's working with here. So she's actually taking thread away that then reveals this particular portrait. And I loved that because it feels resonant to me, at least at this moment, that actually what you and I in our lifetimes will be leading through, what we're shepherding in a sense, is actually the undoing of a lot of the practices, traditions, institutional securities that have defined institutional religion, have defined congregations, have defined human culture up until this point. But it's like if you go to Italy and you go to the Academy in Florence and you see the statue of David, there's a quote by Michelangelo there that says, the job of the artist, the job of the sculptor is to uncover the art that is within. That in a sense, it's a chipping away of that which is chipping away of the stone to reveal the beautiful sculpture that is within that piece of stone, or the taking away of the threads to reveal the beautiful portrait. That there's something about what we're doing right now that is deconstructive, but if we're wise, deconstructive in the healthiest of ways, that reveals a lighter, more agile, more fun, more free way of being in relationship with ourselves and the world. that I think was actually core to what Jesus was teaching us all. That was actually the basis of Jesus' primary message to us, was, to love God, to love ourselves, to love each other. I'm sorry. And he would go on to say, I think, to love the world, to love this beautiful place, and to let everything else go, to take only what we need to go forward, but to let the rest of it go, and to give thanks for it, for bringing us this far, but to not hold on. So I think that's the calling of where we are at this point. That's the work of congregations right now, and I'm grateful to be on this journey with you. I don't know that you have time for group questions at this point, or group discussion, but I wanted to just post these questions for you for further reflection. Again, I make most of this stuff up. I spend my life studying it, but you can certainly disagree or have other perspectives, which I would welcome. So I'd ask, what ideas were meaningful for you? What additional thoughts occur to you? And what has shifted in you? If you have any questions, my email is on this slide, so I'd love to hear from you. But I thank you for this time, for geeking out with me, and I look forward to all that is to come. Go, Bill. Bill, you're muted.
Cameron, I'm just curious because you brought up the fact that climate change is the issue for young people going forward. Are you going to share in the next presentation next weekend some of the churches that might be doing some good work in that area? We're stepping into it ourselves, and
Yeah.
we would love to know who else is out there with whom we could affiliate or learn from or share with, or so that's my question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I love the way that you all are stepping into this. I think it's ambitious and aspirational, and I really applaud your work. So I'll offer like maybe one example, but what I would like to do more than that is actually give you a list. So it might not be featured in next week's webinar, but I'd like to connect you to a lot of congregations who are trying to be creative in this space in varying ways, so that you all can begin to network in that. But you make me feel much better about the world because of the way you're approaching that and dreaming about it. So thank you for that.
Anybody else?
Just to speak to that, we did share the creation care document that the class came up with. So Cameron has that and is also delighted by it the way I am.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions, Cameron. Thanks for your patience. I'm going to walk down here. Nope. Oh, we lost one. We have another one. You have a question first.
Thank you, Cameron. That was an excellent presentation. As an immigrant, that statistically in Minnesota, within 14 years, it will be 70% of us will be person of color. And the uniqueness of this Minnesota is we have a lot of refugees to start with, Somalians and Hmong, and right now more coming, and we're kind of left behind. Not even that, we really have to understand what America's original sin is since 1492 when Columbus found this place. What did we do to build this country? And I think that there's a lot of ignorance of that, painful of this history. It makes me worry about what's going on, this country in the future. Thank you.
Yes, you and me both.
Anybody else have a question? Cameron, thank you. We're going to turn you over to your day.
All right. Thank you all. Great to be with you.
So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We will offer the opportunity here for you folk, for us to talk to each other or amongst ourselves here briefly. I think we can run some breakout groups online for those of you that are attending virtually. And Elizabeth, you got something? Yeah. We can, well, yeah, it's also technically, we want to make sure we can do the Zoom piece. Okay, yeah. So I want to thank you for coming. I do want to offer one final observation because I don't believe in coincidence. So I'm still reflecting on the story about David and the role of David's story here today and what we're doing. And the thread through this is that David had to shed his armor, the traditional armor, everything that everybody expected. This is what you need to take on the bad guys. And he said, I can't operate with this. It just gets in the way. I think that's something for us to remember. So I don't believe in coincidence, and I want to make sure everybody else got that. Thank you.